The push for congressional term limits is happening at the state level, where a growing number of states have passed our term limits on Congress resolution, with more planning to do so. North Carolina may be next on our list. The State House, under the leadership of Speaker Tim Moore, has passed our resolution. The state Senate could pass it at any moment. Joining us on this episode today is North Carolina State Chair Leigh Brown to discuss what's happening in North Carolina. Hi, I'm Holly Robichaud, and this is breaking news on term limits. Momentum continues to build for House Joint Resolution 11, sponsored by Representative Ralph Norman of South Carolina. As I previously mentioned, the resolution known as U.S. Term Limits Amendment now has 97 co-sponsors and counting, with support from both sides of the aisle. We expect that number to reach 100 any day now, as we are close to 150 strong supporters of term limits serving in Congress right now. Could your representative be our 100th sponsor? Please also contact your U.S. representative and urge them to co-sponsor House Joint Resolution 11 if they already haven't. In the U.S. Senate, Texas Senator Ted Cruz continues to be a tireless advocate for term limits. He has sponsored, as we've mentioned before, Senate Joint Resolution 2. It's a companion bill to House Joint Resolution 11. This legislation now has 16 co-sponsors, one of whom is Tim Scott, who entered the presidential race this week. We're hoping that Senator Scott will sign our presidential term limits pledge. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has promised us a vote on House Joint Resolution 11 that would set term limits on Congress. This would be the first vote on this issue since 1995. The Speaker could schedule the vote at any time, so we'll keep you posted as developments happen. Please visit termlimits.com/McCarthy to sign our petition to urge Speaker Kevin McCarthy to bring our House Joint Resolution 11 to the floor for a vote as soon as possible. We've been covering very closely the story about California Senator Dianne Feinstein, who was first elected in 1992. She's recently returned to the Senate after being out of office for 2 months. We're glad she's able to return, and we wish her a continued recovery. However, questions are being raised about her return. It has come out that the senator has been far sicker than first reported. In political reports, she has an aide with her to help identify fellow senators. Representative Katie Porter, a Democrat who is seeking the Feinstein seat in 2024, told CNN this week that the Senate needs to adopt new policies to deal with infirm senators as the average age of the Senate is rising. We have a suggestion for Representative Porter. It's called Congressional term limits. As I mentioned earlier, Senator Tim Scott, who is one of the co-sponsors of a resolution in the Senate, has entered the presidential race this week, and so did one of our other biggest supporters, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor DeSantis has been a tireless advocate for term limits when he served in Congress. As Florida governor, he's appeared in commercials advocating for congressional term limits and supported our efforts nationally. Many people have asked about our term limits pledge commitment from candidates. Let me tell you how it works. U.S. term limits field staff contact candidates of all parties running for the United States House and the Senate, asking them to support the U.S. term limits amendments once elected. They commit to supporting our amendment of 3 terms for the House and 2 terms for the Senate and no other. This pledge is binding for the entire time a member serves in Congress. At the state level, we contact candidates for the state legislatures, asking them to commit, once elected, to co-sponsor, vote for, and defend our resolution applying for an Article 5 convention for the limited purpose of enacting term limits on Congress. This pledge is also binding for the entire time they serve in the state legislature. Encourage people running for office to sign our pledge. Thanks. We're making great progress in the states. We've got a growing number of states that are passing our resolution, and close to getting it done is North Carolina. That's why today we are speaking to Leigh Brown, who is our state chair from North Carolina. Check it out. right, this morning we're joined by Leigh Brown, our North Carolina State Chair. We're so glad to have her on board with us. Leigh, first, why did you get involved with U.S. term limits?
There is a huge majority of the American public that wants to see more turnover in our elected offices. And frankly, I'm one of those frustrated voters that believes we should have some fresh blood and some fresh ideas. And term limits is the best way to do it, since we apparently haven't figured out how to get people to voluntarily step back. We're just going to have to set some parameters. And if I look at what the founding fathers envisioned for this country, it was that regular citizens would decide to serve, take a turn, and then go back to their professional lives. Instead, we have this professional class of politicians who no longer listen to any of us. In fact, I'm in the middle of a FOIA fight with a local elected official right now because they don't want to give up the documents that they're supposed to give up. And that kind of attitude frustrates me big time as a citizen. And, if you want something to get better, may as well roll your sleeves up and be a part of the solution.
All right, great. How do people in North Carolina feel about term limits?
I believe the last data point I saw showed that over 80% of not U.S. citizens, but of North Carolina citizens want some kind of term limits. And when we ask the question, the first thing you find is that most people agree it's not one term. I mean, there's this misconception that those of us that are asking for term limits are trying to get somebody to serve for 1 year and be out. And everybody knows you can't get your feet wet in that short of a time frame. But when you talk to almost anybody out there and say, well, what if it were 5 years, 10 years, 12 years? They have a great level of acceptance for it, because that gives somebody time to get some understanding, get their ideas out into the marketplace, defend those ideas, and then bring somebody else in to take it to the next level, which I think is where we all have some agreement on it, that it's not an all or nothing. It's a great decision that we can all make together. And I got to tell you the truth, when I see anything that unites us, it makes me really happy right now, because we just don't see enough of that.
Yep, that's for sure. Do you think the U.S. term limits resolution has passed in the North Carolina House at least 2 times? Do you think that the voters down there appreciate what the House of Representatives has done? And do you think that would help motivate the Senate to take action?
Well, I do think the voters appreciate it, because many of our candidates run on this concept of term limits, and we see them on Twitter and in their advertising saying that they support term limits. And I'm very grateful that the House decided to go ahead and put the resolution forward. I believe for the Senate, a lot of your candidates have run on the same thing. It just hasn't hit that critical mass yet. So it's just an ongoing conversation where we want to create some understanding of what exactly this means for the population and what it means for the legislative body. And we're making progress, because we have some excellent champions on the Senate side. And like anything else, time works a lot of magic.
That's great. Well, I know with you heading up our efforts in North Carolina, we'll get it passed soon.
Well, we're very hopeful to get some good positive tractions, and North Carolina can continue to lead the way in good, smart, bipartisan, nonpartisan politics.
All right. Well, thank you, Leigh, for joining us. Really appreciate all the work you're doing for U.S. term limits.
It's certainly my pleasure, and thank you for what you're doing. I'm excited to be a part of the team.
All right. Thank you, Leigh. Did you know that before there was U.S. term limits, there wasn't one state that term limited their legislature? Not one. Now, because of U.S. term limits, there are 16 states that have term limits on their legislature. Now let's make it happen in Congress. Delaware's United States Senator Tom Carper, first elected to the Senate in 2000, has been in political office since the age of 29. He's now 76 years old. He announced that he will not be seeking re-election. Politico reported that Delaware has not had a competitive election in decades. Yet this is another reason why we need congressional term limits: competitive elections. Insider trading, which we have zinged various lawmakers on in previous episodes, has become a hot topic in the media. Legislators have been trading bank stocks during the banking crisis. Often they're selling shares just before these banks fail. The Financial Times reported that while lawmakers are facing stricter scrutiny with individual stocks, they face lighter rules on industry funds and country-specific funds. They face no rules if they can buy, sell, or trade on something they're working on, and that's happening on both sides of the aisle. Yet another reason why we need congressional term limits. Do you want congressional term limits? Then we need you to get involved. Get involved today. Check out termlimits.org and see how you can become a valuable member of our team. Congressional term limits can become a reality, but we can't do it alone. We need your help. Be sure to share this program every week with your friends and tune in next week to see what's happening. I'm Holly Robichaud, and this is Breaking News on Term Limits.